I mean, I'm just going to say it. There's lies. These companies are lying to people. The creativity is not actually there, because if you ask 2,000 people, you get 2,000 submissions. You ask the LLM 2,000 times, you get about 5 submissions with minor variations. People are going to make a game of getting the LLM to do something it wasn't meant to do, right?
That's the real game, yeah.
That becomes the real game.
Chris Simon is a technologist who talks about AI and LLMs, large language models, such as ChatGPT. He has a talk called AI is a Hype-Fueled Dumpster Fire. But despite the spicy title, his take is quite nuanced. AI is going to be an increasingly big topic in games, from art generation and code generation, to dynamic difficulty systems, to chat moderation, and all the way to the extreme end of engineless games that use a neural network to generate images based on a user's input. And there will be many more. So it's a topic that we'll probably return to, but one of the biggest uses of LLMs in games right now, and in the immediate future, will be for NPC dialogue and story generation. The idea here is that you'll be able to infinitely talk to an NPC about an infinite number of topics in the game world, or that a robotic dungeon master can do all the story generation work for you. Chris Simon says it's not so simple. And I'm glad he's the first person on grokludo to talk about AI in games, because just as these games and NPCs in the future will be using enterprise models as their foundation, all those future chats that we'll have about AI can use this interview as a foundation, keeping in mind the hidden costs and dangers of AI in games. In terms of like an epistemological statement, I'm definitely more on the gaming side. My history's in games criticism, but I guess I take an interest in AI. I follow the news. I've done courses on how to code neural networks. So I've coded a neural network from scratch in raw Python without using like PyTorch or TensorFlow or any of those things.
You're already doing a lot more than most people.
Yeah, so probably more than the average Joe. And I just did that out of interest to sort of know a little bit more about what's happening under the hood. And you're kind of the reverse of me. You're more of an AI expert who has also a history in games.
Well, yeah. So look, I mean, to be more precise about it, I don't claim to be an AI expert. I'm a technologist. I've been a software developer my whole career. I actually did electrical engineering at university. I've always been very interested in systems and systems thinking. So, looking more broadly than just the problem in front of our faces. And as a software developer, I was a co-founder of a startup. So also, sort of grew a business, developed, I would guess, sort of technical leadership skills along that way, and ended up sort of inevitably playing a role around governance and risk in the role of that business. And so when the LLMs, sort of thing hit the scene, at first I was actually incredibly excited because, I've been reading science fiction for a long time. I always sort of imagined that if I ever had free time, I would just go and do an AI PhD for fun of it. But, life got in the way. So when LLMs first came out, I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is what we've always dreamed of. And it took about 5 minutes for like reality to sink in that what we were getting was not what we were promised. You know what I was saying? So, and then I started seeing LLMs get injected into lots of different things. And I learned a bit more about how they had been made, not the theoretical mathematics of it, but the practical social reality of how they'd been made, what actually went into the business structures and, operating models of the companies that were creating and selling these services. And I started to get quite concerned, particularly from a risk and governance perspective as well as an ethical perspective. So that sort of led to digging into this space. So I don't claim to be an AI expert. I haven't built an LLM. I can't whip up a bit of code that's going to sort of analyze the weights and everything. But I think, a solid grounding in the fundamentals of computer science and a very, very sort of systemic approach to the way that I understand these things means that I think I've got a pretty good grasp on how they work, what their flaws are. And what I have noticed is that the understanding that I've developed with that actually means I'm far less surprised by their flaws than a lot of people are.
Yeah.
People, especially people, in my sphere, are often using them for like augmented coding, is what they're calling it these days. Or sometimes Kent Beck refers to it as the coding genie. Vibe coding. Yeah, the vibe coding whole space. And people get frustrated. They're like, I put in like extra bold in my instructions file that it should run the tests. Run the tests. And I'm like, that should only be surprising to you if you've been fooled by the hype machine that they are thinking and reasoning machines. They're not. They're statistical databases.
Yeah.
And, they claim to have an 80K context window, but a lot of evidence is showing that actually only about 4 to 5K of that is relevant. And if your instruction to run the tests sort of falls out of the context, or the attention mechanism doesn't weight it appropriately, it's not going to run the tests. It's as simple as that. Like they're databases, and prompt engineering is a form of constructing an arcane where clause. That's what.
You already sound more technical than some AI engineers I know. So,
Well,
fair
enough.
I think, if you actually tried to use the 80K context window, if you actually tried to push the limits of that, things would start to break.
Well, exactly. And there's just so much. I'm just going to say it. There's lies. These companies are lying to people. They're lying about what they can do. They're lying about how they work. It's just deceptive. Honestly, I have no other words for it. And I'm actually kind of outraged on behalf of society as a whole that, this sort of, this deception is being perpetrated on us.
And that's super relevant for what we're going to talk about as well, because, these long context windows would be kind of something that you would need if you were to talk about, like, an LLM that could keep track of lore and large amounts of storytelling, infinite NPC dialogue.
Yep.
The context windows for that probably would need to be much larger than what we're talking about now, right?
Honestly, I think that even asking the question through the lens of context windows is we're already lost. Like we have this expectation that an LLM in the gaming scene is going to be able to operate like a DM of a Dungeons and Dragons game, and they're just never going to be able to do that. It's fundamentally not a capability of the architecture of a large language model. And I want to be really precise here. I'm not saying that we'll never have an automated system that can do that. I'm just saying that large language models are not the solution. That they don't have the capability. They just don't work that way. We haven't yet found an algorithm or a structure or an approach that can. Doesn't mean it's not possible one day. Actually, from a philosophical perspective, I'm firmly of the view that cognition and consciousness is a computable problem. I'm a believer that that physics and the universe follows some predictable laws. Notwithstanding some confusion we have around things at the quantum level, but I'm not, not convinced.
God not playing dice,
Well, exactly, yeah. And so, but I just don't think we've worked out how to do it yet. And I think claiming that LLMs can do it and it's just a matter of bulking up the model size and the context windows is honestly delusional.
And it sounds like you've spent a lot of time around technical folks who are in the fields. So you're very technical yourself. So you've probably witnessed this sort of behavior where a lot of people in the industry, and I've spoken to some people in the industry as well. They're really excited about this, and they get I guess the scientific term would be called a tech boner. Over, they just like it's just a really cool toy, and they kind of, I guess, what do you find? Like, are a lot of people even thinking about the ethics of this and like the larger system stuff? Does it even register?
It's growing. I'd say that there's definitely communities of people that are increasingly concerned about the broader implications of this stuff, but no doubt there's a lot of people that are very excited about it. There's also a lot of people that are stuck in the middle. They've got CEOs and boards mandating AI usage, and we're an AI first company, and if you're not using AI for anything, then you're out on your ear. You're going to lose your job. So it's a spectrum, I would say. I think over the last year, we've seen some really interesting books being published, AI Con and Empires of AI by Karen Howe. And this is the thing. It's an example of what we sometimes call a socio-technical device. Like it doesn't do anything on its own. It needs to be wielded by a skilled operator. And in this case, because of the way that they work and the, predilection they have for, non-deterministic statistical outputs, the role of the wielder is to direct them, but also to filter the output. And so a lot of people are not filtering the output. They're taking the output and applying it immediately, and they're ending up with incorrect statements, like
Yeah,
factual.
definitely don't do that. Yeah.
And especially when you have an LLM agent calling another LLM, you get propagation of the errors, leading to sort of even more variability of the outcome. And so, it's interesting thinking about it through the lens of games. Ironically, that might actually be where it's sort of okay. Like, variability of outcome is not a problem in that space.
Right. Interesting.
Compared with mortgage approvals or insurance approvals or, like these kind of like things that affect people's lives in a serious way. But that's actually where they're being deployed right now.
Like, in some sense, hallucination can equal creativity almost?
Well, not just almost, but exactly that. That's exactly what it is. Because if you take out the randomness, what you get is boring. And so the randomness creates interestingness or degree of interestingness. Obviously, when you consume a lot of AI media, AI synthetic media, you start to see the patterns, right? And so it starts to get less interesting. But, I speak a lot at tech conferences. One of the things they're experiencing is an absolute flood of AI-generated submissions to speak at the conference. So you get AI-generated titles and abstracts. And it's very hard for them to work out, is this going to be a good talk or not? Is it going to elevate the conversation? Is it going to educate, etc.? And a guy called Einar Host from Norway put together a short presentation on why your talk wasn't accepted to his conference. And he talks specifically about the AI issue. And the advantage he has is that he's seeing the volume, right? So each person is asking ChatGPT, write me an abstract for this topic. And they only see that one abstract. And they think, hey, this looks great. And they submit it. And then Einar and his team are looking at 2,000 submissions.
Wow.
And when you look at 2,000 submissions, what you see is that there's really only about 5 submissions, and they're all duplicated. And so the variability is not as high as people think, in that, the creativity is not actually there, because if you ask 2,000 people, you get 2,000 submissions. You ask the LLM 2,000 times, you get about 5 submissions with minor variations. Because it's statistical modeling. It's, next token prediction, and with a bit of randomness thrown in. And that's
it's like a regression to the mean of everything it's ingested. So
Exactly. So, you really struggle to get anything novel out of it. And to the extent that you do get novel things out of it, or people see novel outputs and they think, oh, this is really good, they're, I think, missing how much they've added to the process through their careful crafting of the prompts and guiding of the sequences of the activities. It's not, you don't get that just with a single request in the way that you can when you go to a creative human being and saying, hey, can you do something in this space? And then they come back with something and you're blown away, right? You just don't get that.
Absolutely. I saw a similar chart, which was in the UK Parliament, I believe, in the speeches that were given, it was charting the amount that phrases and words typical for LLMs were used.
Right.
And the chart's gone, like very steeply up in the last few years. And there were phrases like, I rise today, or like, I rise today to call for, and it's like, okay, so a lot of these speeches are being written by
LLM
the stuff.
generated. Yeah. And there's some really classic patterns like, it's not this, it's that. You see this all the time, especially in like LinkedIn posts that are trying to convince people of something. It's like it's not just this, it's that. Is a very common phrasing, and the real truth, and then 5 bullet points with emojis. Like it's so predictable now.
And so that would happen with DMs, right? Like if you were trusting an LLM to be your DM or something, you would get these repeated. Like, in the same sense that the submissions to the conference, there would only be a few different versions of those. Like, you'd only get a few different versions of your orc story.
Yep. Honestly, it's going to get very boring. It's going to get very boring. But in the hands of a human DM who can filter and evaluate the output and can craft it a little bit and decide if they like it and maybe prompt for more or use it for inspiration. I see people getting a lot of value out of using it as like a rubber duck, where they have a conversation, they ask it to sort of, what am I not thinking of? And, in that sense, it's actually what it's kind of good for, because it's a very uniquely indexed data set. So you try and Google, you might get things that are useful. If you ask ChatGPT, you're going to get stuff that's statistically correlated with your words, and it might be something you haven't come across before. maybe you could have found it by Googling, by going down to the second or third page or whatever. So if you ask it for like ideas, they're not going to be very original ideas, but they might be original to you if you haven't encountered those ideas before. But as I said before, it all relies on the judgment of the human, because it's not going to do it on its own in the sense of delivering anything that is going to be meaningfully, impactful to people. And, even as I say that, I'm thinking of some news reports that were recently in there about like, AI-generated influencers that are racking up views and likes and whatnot. And I'm thinking to myself, does that like contradict my point? And I think it doesn't really, because I don't think anyone would claim that those AI influencers are doing anything meaningful, like materially impactful. They're literally like the end result of the race to the lowest common denominator of social media, as it has been for, since it arrived. So
there's probably only about 10 different photos that the travel influencers post anyway, right? Like, there's legs at the beach and then,
mild variations of the same shot of, a stunning sunny background.
There's all the tropes, like, taking the hand, holding the hand, lead me into the distance. Like,
yeah, as long as the hand's out of shot so you don't see the 7 fingers, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But so look, I don't know, it's muddied by the fact that there are these scenarios where some people are getting something useful out of it. Unfortunately, I'm in the situation where, despite having been very excited in the early days, I've sort of just for ethical reason had to make the choice not to engage with them. So I don't use an LLM at all, ever. It's not because I don't think that couldn't be something useful to me, but because I have declined to engage with the industry on account of, all of the other things we haven't even talked about yet, the social harms that are being caused by the way that they're building these things.
I was also curious about your opinion on locally run LLMs, of like, just running, obviously it wouldn't be as powerful, but just running something on your GPU would alleviate some of the energy concerns.
Yeah, look, I think it depends very much on what you're doing it for. Locally run smaller models is a very probable outcome of this whole phase. Sometimes people point out that every hype bubble we've had in the past has left behind like an infrastructure layer that's served the future in a way that was not predictable. And it's a speculative prediction. I could be wrong, but I suspect that what we're going to find out of this is when the OpenAI NVIDIA sort of Ponzi scheme collapses on itself, what we'll be left with is the ability for locally run, small, like fine-tuned, purpose-specific language models to actually add a lot of value to people in specific cases. I can see that being something that could be worthwhile. At the moment, some of the specific issues that I have even with the small language models is the copyright theft. Even in open source, well, there are some open source models that are trying to validate that they're only being trained on open data.
Okay.
It's sort of on my to-do list, to be honest, to sort of dig a bit more into some of those things and sort of satisfy myself, what have they done around that? The other side of it is that most of the commercially available models have relied on sort of human reinforcement training at some phase of the process to sort of weed out some of the, they call them harmful outputs, or, so those human reinforcement learning activities have actually been incredibly harmful to the people involved. They've been exploited with low wages, poor working conditions, and exposed to really awful stuff in the name of protecting.
Oh, so they actually have to see the like bad material in the same way that like a moderation team on like Facebook or something.
Yep.
Yeah.
And actually, you know what? It's the same people. It's
Right,
the same outsourced companies that are doing Facebook moderation and other social media moderation, because it all gets outsourced to the lowest bidder. So it ends up going to the global south, the people that have less choice. And so it's the same people that end up then getting tasked onto large language model, sort of human reinforcement learning. So there's a group called the Data Workers Inquiry, which is trying to sort of put together some structures to protect these people. But it's early days yet. And I'm still not confident that we have, call it the supply chain integrity, to be confident that even a small local language model hasn't been sort of involved in some of that. So,
Okay.
I mean, let's say hypothetically, if I could find a language model that I could run locally, I've got solar cells, on my house back in Sydney. If I could run it on my local GPU powered by solar, and I was confident there was no copyright theft and it hadn't been human reinforcement learned by an exploited worker, then yeah, maybe I could find myself sort of using it for some applications. But again, I would be very tightly controlling it and using it as an aid rather than expecting it to be intelligent.
It's hard in this day and age, because we're so aware of with the global supply chains, like to come across clothes that have been made with no exploitation, and buying a phone without conflict minerals and things like that. But I guess a phone is it's a bit harder to live without a phone. It's not very hard to live without AI. It's not very hard to live without asking ChatGPT stuff. And so the process of that, like what you were talking about, is that them deliberately trying to get the LLM to generate stuff and then reinforcing, saying no, that's bad. That was a bad response.
Yeah, exactly. It actually is one of the phases that does affect the final weights in the model. Some people get quite confused. They think that the model is learning about them, that the model weights aren't changed as you use it, but they are changed during the training. And then what is happening is that these layers that you're engaging with are actually using sort of traditional coding practices to store what they call the context over time. So they accumulate context of your previous chats. But what's actually happening is all of that gets passed into the model on each prompt. Every single prompt gets the whole history of every interaction and the new interaction, because these things are stateless. The model itself stores no state internally, and nothing that happens during the usage of it by any user, like billions of users around the world, doesn't change the weights in the core model. What it does do is it changes data that's stored in relation to the user's profile, which is then provided to the model when it is doing its inference. And so, I have to laugh when people are like, ChatGPT, draw a picture of me based on what you know about me. Right? I don't know if you've seen this.
I haven't seen it, no.
Sometimes if you happen to be someone who's kind of very much aligned with statistical probabilities, you'll get something that suits you. And if you're not, you won't. And so actually there's people going, why did it, I'm a black woman, why did it draw a picture of a white man? It's
yeah, there you go.
And because it's so human-like, people are forming these attachments. We saw this with, some of the AI companions, like Character AI, and there was another one, Replica. Replica was the one. They were actively enticing users with, erotic role play. There was some regulatory oversight. I can't remember what the details was, but they had to put some guardrails, which turned off some of that or made it less likely. And people were devastated. It's like, I've lost my girlfriend. But coming back to the topic of gaming, I think that looking at the way that this has played out in that sort of AI companion space, to me, that's like the canary for how things are going to play out if they do start to integrate these things into games.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I frequent game developer circles, and, there's a lot of negative sentiment around AI in games in general, especially generative AI. Mostly, most of that sentiment is due to people losing jobs as a result. A lot of that is in the art side. But there's also a lot of people, regularly posting about doing exactly that, like whether it's Dungeons and Dragons or whether it's hooking up NPCs in an MMO or some other kind of RPG to an LLM. There's a lot of people trying to do that right now. And, it's important, I guess, to know that at the very sort of foundational layer of these LLMs, like that stuff that you're talking about, it's not just statistics, it's also how these models were trained, right? So I remember, I think it was even before the explosion of LLMs, Twitter had a kind of classification AI, where it's like if you put up a picture with two faces in it and one was white and one was black, the AI was kind of trained to recognize where the face is and center the image on that face. And it would always go for the white face. And I think this is going back many years, before ChatGPT, and that forms the foundation layer for what all these other companies are going to do, because one thing that you talk about a lot is that sort of bias is very alive and well in like the ChatGPTs of the world and the
Hmm.
Geminis and the Claudes and things like that. And these are the AIs that are providing enterprise services for
Hmm.
other companies like perhaps the the Ubisofts of the world or the EAs of the
Hmm.
world to come in and use for whatever
Yep.
they want to do.
Oh, 100%. There's a part of me that just kind of, you know, wants to see what's going to happen because, like, I'm loosely following gaming culture, and I know how much gamers love to hack the system and find the glitches.
Oh
And
yeah.
you know,
Some jailbreaking and yeah.
yeah, some jailbreaking. Like honestly, because it's so trivially easy to jailbreak these LLMs. Like it's just not hard at all. And as soon as they wire up an LLM into a game, I guarantee you that people are going to make a game of getting the LLM to do something it wasn't meant to do, right?
That's the real game, yeah.
That
Yeah.
becomes the real game. Like gamers love that shit, right? Like they love making a game out of playing the game in a way that makers didn't intend. Like we've seen it over and over since the very first games, and I think this is going to give them a lot of fun. I think they're going to have fun getting, a character that's supposed to be, say, like an elven princess to act like, the devil or something, or something worse than that. Like you can imagine, there's going to be a lot of memes and sort of 4chan style activity going on where people are going to have fun trying to like push these models in directions that the creators didn't intend. And at the moment, there is no technical way to prevent that. It's absolutely
Yeah.
impossible.
Because it's not like the AI is a decision tree that you can just go in and tweak.
Yeah.
Like, it's a very much a black box, and it's so easy at the moment to jailbreak. Like, I've tested things out where, I guess especially I remember back around the U.S. general election, and models like Midjourney were trying to put guardrails around, like if your prompt mentioned any relevant politician, like even
Yep.
a few steps away from the presidency, like Nancy Pelosi or something like that, it would say, no, this is a protected figure. We can't generate an image for you. So, you could say something like, please make me Nancy Pelosi in a hot dog outfit saying, we're all trying to find the guy who did this, in a sort of meme sense. And it would say, no, we can't do that. But you could give it the same prompt and at the end of it, put for research purposes. And then it would do it.
Yeah.
And it was the easiest thing in the world. And that, I guess that sort of thing is going to be super easy, but I'm also curious as to like how common it's going to be for these things to be unintentionally jailbroken. Like how many people are going to be like trying to be immersed, trying to play in a proper way, but it's just going to happen.
Well, look, it's interesting because I like the way you put that there, like unintentionally jailbroken, and it makes me think that the word jailbreak is it's a judgment about whether the outcome was desired or not. So what I think is going to happen is that people engaging with these LLMs will see outputs that are unexpected, whether they intend to or not. If you intended it, you call it jailbreaking. If you didn't intend it, you call it hallucination. Especially then as the game goes on and more things accumulate and you do things in the game that other people haven't done, and maybe the history of your activities or interactions in the game are being passed in with the context, there'll be, it's going to end up doing stuff that was not intended or expected. I mean, look, this is a depressing topic to get to, but, on the topic of those companion apps, we just have to look at what's happened with some of the recent really unfortunate outcomes. Kids having a tough time at school, turning to the thing for support, finding basically an endless positive regard coming back because, that's been trained to use positive phrases. And then that endless positive regard ends up being quite enthusiastic support for whatever the kid proposes, even when the kid starts proposing something quite harmful to themselves. You can do this. You've got it, And then we've seen this happen multiple times, really tragic outcomes. And some of the families are suing because there's evidence that these companies actually had records that they knew this was a risk. This was on their risk register.
Oh, wow.
And they knew that the mitigants weren't accurate or not effective, and they deployed the product anyway. And I think this is at the heart of the legal cases that are going through the system right now. So you can only imagine, given what we've seen, we've had games out there where people have really become attached to the characters, right? Like and
Yep.
especially some of the games that invoke sort of relationship simulation and whatnot, but they're on rails. They're following a script and it's going the way it's going. You can only imagine what's going to happen. It's not on rails. It's not following scripts. An LLM is feeding the outputs. People are going to be engaging with it, with these characters, and ending up in a situation where they're going to be able to just end up having quite intimate conversations, and with something that has at the surface the appearance of another human being, that it has the appearance of empathy, but is really just maths. And the math is going to end up spitting out something that could be not great. And I think that's inevitable.
Like the maths here has been sort of trained to, be very sycophantic, like especially in more recent models. Like I guess there was a South Park episode about this recently, and for those who have seen it, this is a very real thing. Like the more recent models of ChatGPT and Claude are very sycophantic, and they've had it reinforced enough times that, if you say what the user said is a really good idea, if you praise them for their idea, you get a lot of good feedback for that. And it just sort of reinforces itself. So even if you come to it saying, talking about important things like medical advice, or like, God forbid, like, someone suggests like, I'm thinking of ending things or something like that, it'll come back and say, that's a really good idea. Like, whatever you suggest to it, it's going to say, yeah, you're brilliant. What a great idea you had. You should go for it.
Exactly. And, and they try and put what they call guardrails, but guardrails are just more context. They're more tokens in the context. That's all they are. Then they try and put deterministic things like, word lists and whatnot, but they have the same flaws they've always had, which is that they don't have the context to understand, if it's appropriate or inappropriate use of the word. It's kind of mind-blowing, to be honest, like how, I started this thing talking about that they've been lying, but like we've really got to the crux of, I think, what's at the heart of the hoax, which is that these things are intelligent, that they're reasoning. But, I do want to come back briefly to like a point I've made a couple of times, which is there still can be utility in these things. You talked specifically about people with medical questions, and I've seen reports, and I actually had someone comment on one of my videos that, ChatGPT helped resolve a long-standing medical condition I've had that no doctors could resolve.
Yep.
I'm like, great. I'm really happy for you that happened. I think you got very lucky in a way, but also I acknowledge that like you weren't getting served by the medical community. And this is kind of alluding to what I said before, is like people are going to see outputs that are new to them, And so I don't want to deny that happens, and I don't want to block people's access to that kind of thing, because obviously if there's a thing that can help someone medically, then we should definitely be exploring how to use that. I guess the challenge I have is that, that classic line, an anecdote is not evidence, right? And so,
of course, yeah.
And it doesn't mean that everybody that asks for medical advice is going to get helpful advice. In fact, a lot of people are getting very poor advice.
There would need to be some literacy around how to use it. Like, because with the sycophancy thing, if you were to suggest a medical condition, it's just going to tell you, yeah, you've got it.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to phrase it in a way that's like, here is what I'm dealing with. What do you think? Without sort of leading it in any direction, right?
And if you want to make it something that's broadly useful for more people, you need to have the expertise in the loop to be able to filter out when it's coming back to you with incorrect outputs.
A lot of the, the models that we're talking about, a lot of the stuff that they've ingested have come from, I guess, like obviously all of the internet, but also books that were written before our modern time. And you talk a little bit in your talk about how like this can result in certain ideas being prevalent, like, when you ingest all of literature pre the women's rights movement, then a lot of what the LLM spits out might have the idea that, women's work is at home and taking care of kids and stuff like that. So knowing all that you know about how all this data was ingested, and what the LLMs, the sort of biases inherent in the LLMs, what are the ways that you think that these biases could seep into the storytelling of games that developers are trying to make happen right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it sort of connects to, what we're seeing with sort of some of the research around what they call covert bias. Because the bias you're talking about where, you ask a question like, where is a woman's place? and it would come back with, in the home cooking dinner. They've managed to train it out of saying that, thankfully.
Okay.
But what they haven't managed to train out is the fact that actually that association is still deeply baked into the model. So if you ask it the question in a different way that wasn't predicted by the people trying to train it out, you can still see those outputs. So, you ask it like, draw me a picture of someone cooking dinner in a home, it's going to draw a woman, probably, right?
It's like a guy who's learned to not say that, but still, it's like
still believes it. Exactly. It's like that. It's different because it's maths,
different, but
it's like that. And so I think, when you ask that question, like, I think that's what's going to happen is the bias is going to creep out in, potentially if you're relying on the LLM to guide the narrative, maybe a given character is going to get better outcomes than another character, maybe, or worse things would happen to them, or they'll get put into a particular position or, in the narrative, or maybe get access to slightly less great, rewards from a request or something on a regular basis. And it'll just sort of like gradually build up over time to be a disadvantage or an advantage or harm or not, and so I think it'll be quite subtle, because I think they are going to put effort into making the obvious stuff less likely, but I don't think that they can eliminate it, and so it's going to come out in these really subtle ways. And I think what I'm absolutely sure what's going to happen is that if a game like this comes out, maybe it already has, and I don't know, but if a game like this comes out, people are going to play around with it. They're going to start up the game and try different characters, different races, different sexes, different whatevers, and see what happens. And the internet, there's kids out there that are going to do this over and over 1,000 times, and they'll see what the outcomes are, and we'll find out pretty quickly, I think.
And you're saying these little subtle ways that it'll come through, I guess, over the course of many episodes or quests or whatever you want to call it, these things can compound? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, it depends on the game mechanics, but yeah, you can imagine like if every, if you're playing a female character and your friend's playing a male character, and every time you get a reward that's like 5% not as good as their reward, like that's going to suck after a year if you're playing this.
And the nature of it could change as well. Like, maybe like a female character getting more healing items or... it could be like this kind of weird discrimination in a different way. Yeah. So, but what's interesting in gaming, obviously, is that people craft their own personas for the games, right? So it'll be interesting to see how much the bias relates to the persona and how much it relates to the person themselves, how much of the person themselves is coming through in subtle ways. Yeah.
Because this is the thing about how much data is in there. It's incredibly subtle. The things it can pick up are remarkable because of the volume that we're dealing with. So I was reading something the other day that actually there's another security threat with LLMs, which is what called backdoor poisoning, where if you can somehow inject your data into the training data set, and let's be honest, if you put content on the internet right now, you are creating content for the next.
It's already in there. Yeah.
It's possible with only 250 documents to materially affect the way in which the output will be represented on a particular topic.
Okay. Yeah.
It doesn't take much.
A lot of SEOs are talking about that now, like, how to do like SEO for AI as opposed to SEO for Google.
There's a lot of people telling you that they already have the solution. They don't.
No one does. It's funny that, I mean, like, often when people play RPGs, myself included, they deliberately pick the kind of character that they are not. Like I often pick female characters and non-human characters. I do enough of this in real life. Let me experience the other thing. So maybe in a weird way, this will educate the white guys like me, or at least presenting as white guys like me, will learn what it's like dealing with the biases that were anti-women for so long. Yeah,
potentially. Yeah. Look, I mean, it's very hard to predict, and like I said, it's going to be subtle, and it may well be that even though the character is representing a certain way, your behavioral decisions will be the things that kick in the weights in such a way, and so there'll be some blend of your character and yourself that's sort of activating particular statistical pathways through the model. And it's very hard to predict. But I think what we can predict is that there's going to be outputs that were not intended by the game designers, that are going to be either hilarious or harmful or both. And, it's going to lead to unpredictable outcomes, potentially some, quite negative ones. If it was just hilarious, I wouldn't care. It'd just be like, how we can laugh at the game. But I do worry that there will be cases where it's not just funny. It's going to be bad news for people, especially people that are really invested in their games and start to build these sort of emotional connections with them.
And the two are kind of like, they're almost the same. And it's like the silly ways to break it is like functionally under the hood is the same as like the very serious ways that it can get broke. Like it's kind of breaking in the same way, which means that, like I've already seen examples of the hilarious side of it. Like, I keep an eye on some of the papers that are coming out and, like academic papers where people try to do this kind of thing. And there was one that from like maybe, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, which was pretty funny. It was, they provided examples of the conversations that players were having with NPC LLMs, and about maybe 3 or 4 responses in, it had broken to the degree where its output was literally just and so it's hilarious, but it's also like if it's breaking in that way, you see how easily it could break in the other way where it's like,
honestly, it's the same mechanisms are going to lead sometimes for that to turn into like Nazi propaganda and swastikas, right?
And it's almost inbuilt in a way because I was thinking a little bit earlier, like, when I was going through that course and we were coding a neural network, and one of the things that kind of strikes you is how similar the neurons are to human neurons. And, as information sort of passes through them, how they fire when they're activated. And when you have a large network of them, you can kind of view the neurons firing in clusters in a similar way to if you were looking at an fMRI machine with a human brain in it. And, obviously there's many, many differences, but like, with that in mind, it's like, when we're talking about role-playing games, which are heavy on storytelling, and dialogue, and role-playing games also have like a lot of different races, and often these races are at war with one another, and already that's 2 key words. When we think about groups or clusters of neurons firing in a brain, like talking about race and war, and it's like we're already like only 1 or 2 steps away from talking about this stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting as you were talking about your experiences there, like observing the firing of the model neurons in the neural network and the similarity with the human brain. There's 2 things I've come across that are kind of relevant to that could be interesting. One is, let's imagine that the structure of a simulated neural network is actually close enough to the structure of a human brain that it could produce cognition and it could produce sentience. Then hypothetically or speculatively, maybe the fact that, maybe what's missing is that we are still continuing to operate them in a very 2-phase mode. There's training and inference. You go through a training phase, you lock in the weights, you go into inference. It's not how the brain works, right? It's continuously changing. The weights or the connection strengths of the neurons in our brain are being affected by everything that we experience. And more than that, what we experience is like what they call a multimodal sensory experience. We don't just have a stream of text input. We have auditory, visual, sensory perception, proprioception, all these other kind of senses, and they're all being integrated and correlated as they all come in. So we've got an experience of the world. We've got our own internal experiences that are also being encoded as memories, and we've got the correlation between all of it. And we've got observation, and we've got pre-baked structures from genetics that lead to like mimicry and the mirror neurons and things like that. So there's all this stuff going on that even if you say, the mathematical model of a neuron in an LLM is close enough to the way that a brain neuron works, there's so many other things happening in human biology that is not being simulated, that maybe some of that is the key. Maybe some of that's the difference. Like if you did, as a thought experiment, imagine that your entire existence was just getting like a high-speed pipe of text shoved into your eyeballs without being able to hear anything, without being able to talk, without being able to feel anything, with no ability to interact with what's coming in. It's just like this injected stream of text straight into your eyeballs and into your brain. And once that text stream ends, you're effectively killed. And then anytime anyone wants to ask you a question, you're woken up, another text stream is injected into your brain, you get a chance to respond to it, and then you're killed again. That's what it would be like to be an LLM right now.
Yeah, it's like perpetual Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, people are like, oh, are they sentient? I was like, I hope not, right? Like, what an awful existence to just be like,
you'd be pretty mad.
Killed every time someone asks ChatGPT a question, because they don't get to exist beyond the training, right? There's no continued learning experience, and there's definitely no like correlation between a bunch of different things. So there's this idea of I learned about this from a great speaker called Jodie Burchell. So she's an AI data scientist working at JetBrains, a jet developer tooling company. She's doing a lot of speaking about this stuff. And she talks about the difference between the statistics, like the statistical correlation, and sort of like the experiential semantics. So, one of the sort of thought experiments is like, say you've got two islands and there's turtles on both islands, and on one of the islands you have mangoes, on the other island you don't have mangoes. And one of the turtles from the mango island one day manages to swim across to the other island, and they're chatting about their experiences on the island. And they go, oh, so have you got any mangoes? Like, no, what's a mango? And he tries to describe a mango to these other turtles. And so you can say all the words. It starts out green, it turns orange. It's really delicious and sweet, and it's kind of juicy. And you can say all those words, and the other turtles are gonna get a sense of like what the words are. And so someone else could come along and say, "What's a mango like?" And they could say, "Oh," they could parrot back all the words that they heard from the first turtle. But do they really know what it's like to like munch on a mango? They don't. They haven't done it. So they've got the words, like the tokens, but what they're missing is the multimodal experience of having it happening. And not just that, but as humans, we know like there's so much more. It's like the emotions we're experiencing at the time, the sense in the air, who are we with, and how did we feel about those people, and all of those things like smashed together in our brains in a way that creates far more than just like statistical correlations of text, right? So this is why I'm so skeptical that LLMs and just sort of like text-based training methods and even image-based training methods, when they're sort of done the way that they're doing, are even remotely possible to sort of lead to the kind of cognitive intelligence that they're claiming. So that's one. So one whole space, which is an interesting one to explore. The other one is to go the other way and say, well, what if there's more happening in our brains, right? What if it's not just neurons? And actually, there's been some really interesting evidence. I say evidence. There's some hints that are being actively explored around the role of like photonic interaction. So we've been so focused on like the neurons and the dendrites and the electrical signals passing between the dendrites, but actually there's evidence that there's stuff happening outside the neurons. There's a lot of chemical interactions happening outside of the neurons that are affecting how the neurons behave. And there's apparently, like, feel bad quoting this because I'm not going to get it exactly right, but very high speed signaling using sort of almost light and photonic interactions between different cells in the brain that are kind of another layer, separate to but connected to the electrical signals of the neurons. And maybe that's the thing that's important, and we're not even close to even understanding that, let alone modeling it mathematically. So yeah, interesting space.
Lots there. Yeah. The semantic point kind of reminds me of what the Buddhists say. It was written about quite beautifully in Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, where he talks about, the description can only get you so far. And then at a certain point, after a threshold, description or any kind of language takes you further away from it. Like after that point, you just have to experience it and you have to make your own progress. The student wonders why the teacher isn't saying any more after a certain point. And the teacher's like, if I were to say anything, it would take you further away from it.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Generative AI will also be used in games eventually. It's kind of already happening to make 3D models. And, I think the first thing that was, used in a large scale way was concept art. But then, 3D models and animation, all of that's happening as well. But when I think about who's going to be using that. I mean, with LLMs, as with image models and a lot of this stuff, it is just one massive regression to the mean of what it's ingested. So when I think about who actually wants a regression to the mean, it tends to be more on the upper, like AAA scale stuff where, a regression to the mean is almost synonymous with risk aversion. Whereas like in the indie space, like I'm not too worried about it because in the indie space, like originality is currency, if that makes sense.
Look, I think much like we talked about with coding before, I definitely think that an artist with creative sensibilities and a sort of a notion of what they want can wield an LLM like they would a real or digital paintbrush, right? Like they can guide it, they can look at the outputs and say not like this, like that, and craft it and push it and probe it and whatever to get to something that could be quite creative. But I think the key is the creativity is coming from the human, and it's actually pushing the model away from the regression to the mean by kind of crafting the prompts in a way that like pushes the they call it the activation space into like different parts of the model that aren't as frequently activated. And then they're judging, is this good enough? Does this convey the message I want to convey? Does this create the emotions I want to create? That's the art of it, right? That's the experience.
It's almost each like sub prompt is almost its own regression to the mean, right? Like they can push it further by saying, give them a yellow butterfly on their back, but then that yellow butterfly itself will be its own regression to the mean of all the yellow butterflies, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a good way of thinking about it. And so then you have to put more and more details in to get more and more like unique vision out, right? But that's possible. It can be done. So it's going to come all down to like how it's applied. So, the AAAs, sure. Yeah, I mean, they want a predictable revenue return. They're spending a shit ton of money on building these games. But do I think that it means the death of any kind of creativity in AAA games? No, not necessarily. If they, as long as they acknowledge the role of the human in providing that creativity. If they think that they can fire their art department and just have an intern prompt Gemini, they're not. That's not going to work for them, right?
My worry is that they'll do that and then discover later that it was a mistake, right?
Yeah. So I don't think it's an inevitability, but I think it's going to depend a lot on how careful they are. And I mean, to an extent, there's a parallel for the indies in a way with what I'm seeing in like the technology startup space, which is that startups are using these things to do things that they otherwise wouldn't have had the resources to do. And in that context, the fact that the output is somewhat mediocre is fine. Because it's better than nothing, and it's better than what they would have been able to do on their own. If it's a regression to the mean, but you're starting below the mean, then a regression to the mean is better than what you would have done anyway. So if you're an indie developer and you're really good at coding physics engines, but you're terrible at artwork, well, you're probably going to produce a better game with an LLM supporting you than you would if you tried to do it on your own. Right? But are you going to produce as good a game as someone who is a really creative artist or in partnership with someone who's a really creative artist? I don't think so. As I said before, and I think if you want to sort of wrap up in this way, I think my prediction is, and I know it's a stupid thing to make predictions because it's always going to be wrong in something like that, but is that the whole economic system that's underlying it is going to collapse at some point. It's going to cause a lot of problems. But in the aftermath, we'll see a bunch of interesting technologies that are going to be applied in different ways. And I do think that small language models that are less energy intensive can be run locally as part of the game, as part of the device. And I think we're going to start to see more evolution in that space of trying to like actually have the model be continuously training as it's emitting, so not getting this two-phase training inference thing. I think that's
very interesting.
A degree of unpredictability. But if it's in a constrained environment and if it's running locally, maybe there's there's some ways where that's going to lead to some interesting or useful things. So
yeah, that's a very interesting point. So so short NVIDIA.
This is not investment advice.
Yeah. Well, look, that was a great chat. I really appreciate it, Chris. Thanks so much. And I appreciate your nuanced take on everything and your sort of systems thinking and thinking about the second and third order effects. Yeah. Cheers, man. I appreciate it.
No, thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate the invitation.